Like a wise master builder, I laid a foundation, and another is building on it. But each person must be careful how he builds on it, for no one can lay a foundation other than the one which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it is to be revealed with fire, and the fire itself will test the quality of each one's work. If anyone's work which he has built on it remains, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet only so as through fire. Do you not know that you are a temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone destroys the temple of God, God will destroy that person, for the temple of God is holy, and that is what you are. Most scholars put this book being written between 54 and 55 AD. So, again, footnotes. Turn to Luke. We're doing a lot of reading this morning, obviously. Again, while you're turning there, we're laying a lot of groundwork. And we're laying a consistency through the scriptures that leads us up to the language that John uses in Revelation. Luke 17, beginning in verse 20. Now, having been questioned by the Pharisees as to when the kingdom of God was coming, he answered them and said, "The kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed, nor will they say, 'Look, here it is,' or 'There it is.' For behold, the kingdom of God is in your midst." And he said to the disciples, "The days will come when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. They will say to you, 'Look there, look here.' Do not go away. Do not run after them. For just like the lightning, when it flashes out of one part of the sky and shines to the other part of the sky, so will the Son of Man be in his day. But first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. And just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, and they were being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, and they were buying, and they were selling. They were planting, and they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. And likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. I tell you, on that night there will be two in bed. One will be taken and the other will be left. There will be two women grinding in the same place. One will be taken and the other will be left. Two men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other will be left. And answering, they said to him, "Where, Lord?" And he said to them, "Where the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered." What is consistent between Noah, the flood with Noah, Lot with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the returning of Christ? Disbelief. Yes, that's definitely the motivation, but I'm thinking in terms proactively. What is consistent? They did not know when it would happen. It was judgment. There was complete destruction. Okay? Complete destruction. Okay, that's a contextual concept to keep in mind when we get into Revelation. Yeah, Chad?
Kind of redundant, but there's that point in time where it's too late to change your mind.
Yes, where it's too late to change your mind. Yeah. Yep. And they certainly had more than enough time, as does this generation. Yeah.
Just one quick point about Luke passage that I always love. One will be left, two will be in bed, one will be left, one was working in the field, one is grinding grain. They always slept only at night, and they always worked in the day. The world was round, and Jesus knew it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want you in Luke, in verse 25, to underline the last part of that verse. Be rejected by this generation. We're going to come back to it in a few minutes. We're going to make a comparison here in a few minutes. Okay, the next reading is Mark 13. And again, we're going to take a few minutes. We're going to read the whole chapter. It's a fairly short chapter, but we're going to read the whole chapter. Okay. I'm sorry? Mark 13. Yes, sir. I want you also to take note that these passages that we're going to go back and compare the language on were written by 3 different men. Okay? And that's another important thing in terms of substantiating the point that I want to draw from it, or one of the points. So Mark 13. As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, behold, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down." As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him privately. "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all of these things are going to be fulfilled?" And Jesus began to say to him, "See to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and will mislead many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. Those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will also be famines. These things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. But be on the guard, for they will deliver you to the courts, and you will be flogged in the synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them. The gospel must first be preached to all nations. When they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but it is the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. You will all be hated because of my name, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one who is in the housetop must not go down or go in to get anything out of his house, and the one who is in the field must not turn back to get his coat. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that it may not happen in the winter, for those days will be a time of tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now and never will. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'Behold, he is there,' do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise, and will show signs and wonders in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed. Behold, I have told you everything in advance. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. And they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send forth the angels, and will gather his elect from the four winds, from the farthest end of the earth to the farthest ends of heaven. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But for that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Take heed, keep on the alert, for you do not know when the appointed time will come. It is like a man on a journey who is leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task. Also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening, at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, in case he should come suddenly and find you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. There's 2 things I want you to underline. In verse 14, in Judea must flee to the mountains. The second thing is in verse 30. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away. What is Jesus talking about? Not this generation, but in whole in this chapter, what is Jesus talking about? The destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? What's interesting is that I've come to despise this term. The term is scholar. And I'm going to tell you right now, I never want to be considered a scholar. I'm going to paraphrase the words of former President Ronald Reagan. It's not that scholars don't know anything, it's just that so much of what they know is wrong. So I never want to be considered a scholar, because if I become a scholar, then I'm no longer a student. Okay? But they all come to the same conclusion about this. This is the same Greek word, this generation. There's two Greek words that's used here, that's used in Matthew. So where am I? I'm in Matthew, Mark, and Luke all use the same two Greek words. And the interpretation of that language is this generation. This generation of men, not the generation of man. And that's an important concept when we talk about in understanding Revelation versus premillennialism. It is not the destruction of mankind. It's not the second coming. It is that generation. So if we look on those words being written sometime between 30 and 40 AD, what makes sense? 70 AD makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? In terms of context. Yeah, that was the final straw. But when Titus did it, and we're going to spend a lot more time on that later, but when Titus did it, he finished the job.
Well, if it wasn't pertaining to them, then why isn't some of this generation still alive?
Yeah. But it's used, the same Greek words are used by all three writers. Okay? So keep that in mind as we get further into the book. Okay. I'm going to set a circumstance. I'm going to ask a question, and I only want you to raise your hand if you've never felt this way. Okay? Your stomach is in knots. You feel an overwhelming stress about circumstances you fear but can do nothing about. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's concern about where you will live. Maybe it's about your health or the health of your loved ones. It's not a lack of faith, but an encompassing feeling of uncertainty. Has anyone here never felt like that? I would have been surprised if someone said so. So let me set the stage. This is what the church in the first century felt. Your friend, your neighbor, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, drug off in the night by a Roman army to be impaled for a garden party. Will you be next? Peter's dead. Crucified upside down in front of everyone as an example. Paul is dead. Beheaded in the public square like a hooligan. In fact, all the apostles are dead, except John. And he's been banished to a small island. No one's even heard from Timothy or Titus. Every time you walk down the street, you have one eye trained to spot a centurion. Whose name is next on their list? Will you make it back home tonight? Will your door be the next one broken down and you drug off? You carry a parchment, concealed as much as you can without being obvious. On it is a letter penned by John. Last letter you think you're ever going to get from an apostle. You guard it with your life, with a special message on it for your eyes and for those you love and those you worship alongside. If you're stopped and searched, will it be obscure enough that the soldier will let you go on your way? Your only concern is to bring these tidings to the rest of the church in the town where you worship. That's the first century church. That's the time between 60 and 70 AD. Okay, now show of hands. If I say boob tube with multi-frequency rainbow enhancements, how many of you know what I'm saying? What? Color TV. Yeah. Uh-huh. How about fanatically demonic flying dragon invasion on imperial colonialism? The attack on Pearl Harbor. Or how about a monolithic assault on peaceful doves harvesting their daily bread in the fields? The War of Northern Aggression. Okay. You have now had a lesson on apocalyptic language. Not all that scary, is it? The mystique of Revelation is from this apocalyptic language, and it's not from something we should shy away. The challenge is to know the context of whom it was that wrote the language. So in the movie The Wizard of Oz, what was the mystique?
Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
Did that pop up? Yep. Okay. Wasn't the wizard the mystique in The Wizard of Oz? Okay. In this study, I want to try to pull back the curtain. And
It's not 40 now.
Bert, help. Oh, really? There we go. So we're going to pull back the curtain and expose the wizard, the mystique, that we tend to assign to the book of Revelation. Behave. 1 Corinthians 14. No. Boy, you're giving away all my stuff before I get to it. Stop it. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. One of the challenges is that we tend to read the epistles linearly. Okay? In other words, from start to finish. Sometimes we'll go back to another apostle or another epistle for reference. Sometimes we'll jump forward to another epistle. But we pretty much read it linearly from beginning to end. Left to right. Or you're left to right. Okay. And most of the epistles do progress in that fashion. Revelation, however, is different. It's better illustrated like this, three-dimensionally, where we are going to peel back and unravel the layers. We see some of that same thing in Acts, where you have chunks and then chunks, and they're really sitting like this. Well, that's how Revelation is written. Okay. We'll see the multiple layers, the time frames that go on top of each other. But since it can't be written in three dimensions, okay, the layers are stacked, and so sometimes they appear to be repetitive. Much in the same way that if I was to tell you about my visit to the donut shop to get my kolaches this morning and a wreck happened right out there, okay, I would tell you first about the kolaches because that's the good part. Then I would tell you about the wreck, even though they happen simultaneously. And so hopefully that picture helps you understand. How many of you consider yourselves historians? Historian. How many of you consider yourself historians? Well, by the time we are done, you will. Tommy's not here. I can't make fun of him. And you won't even have to pay LSU $100,000 to become one. Okay, I'm not sure how this is supposed to pop up with the bullets like Wade did a great job of. I have done. Ha ha. First question, why was Revelation written? Why was Revelation written?
Comfort and support.
To comfort and support who?
The people of John's time.
The church in John's time. Now, does that mean that we can't take comfort from it? That we can't take encouragement from it? No. But it was written to the church in the first century, and that's an important context. Was it understood by the first century Christians? If so, why can't we understand the book? Does anybody here think that it was not understood by the first century church? Then it's strictly context, isn't it? In understanding the context of the apocalyptic language that appears in Revelation. Okay, those are important concepts for us to keep in mind. The third one is, why was it included in the canon? Many of you are going to be surprised to learn that this book was challenged by the fewest number of scholars along the way as to why it should be included in the canon. It appears where it appears, mostly because Luther stuck it at the end. He couldn't argue that it belonged in the canon, but he didn't think it talked enough about Christ. Yeah. Okay, so why was it written? We need to understand the socio-political religious settings of the first century. Now, what I'm going to read from was another one of these scholars. He's got some letters after his name that I guess are supposed to be important. I'm going to confine the readings from this to the historical perspective and try to leave his opinions out because he's a premillennialist, and it becomes very evident in what he writes. But nonetheless, this is going to be a little burdensome, but do your best to pay attention to me and not fall asleep, please. Jesus lived during a tumultuous period of Jewish history, dominated by the Roman military occupation of Palestine. Side note here, this was the Roman Empire, not the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic had already self-destructed and been replaced by the Roman Empire. So it went from being a free country to being what we remember reading about in terms of the Roman Empire. Very oppressive, very self-serving. So just keep that part in mind. In fact, the aftermath of the momentous upheavals of the rule of Herod the Great and the fragmenting of Jewish politics and religion into various competing sectarian factions, each with their own unique perspective. In many ways, one of the biggest factors that inhibits our understanding of Jesus' world is the fact that we live in the United States in the 21st century. We live at a time of relative peace. Jesus didn't. We enjoy the benefits of democracy and human rights for the most part. Jesus didn't. We live in a society that enjoys reasonable economic prosperity and social mobility. Jesus didn't. The key to understanding the words and actions is to try to imagine what life would have been like for the poor, lower-class Jews in the first century Galilee in an obscure backwater of the Roman Empire. When the Seleucid Empire, under the control of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, took control of Israel in the Ptolemaic dynasty, lots of big words, okay? Antiochus' insistence that a statue of Zeus be put up in the temple provoked the rebellion led by a priestly clan called the Hasmoneans, or Maccabees. Okay? The revolt of the Maccabees. The rule of Herod the Great, 37 BC to 4 BC, brings us to the threshold of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, who appears to have been born at the end of Herod's reign. Of course, Herod the Great is the person you love to hate in Jewish history. Nevertheless, nobody in Israelite history has left more of a physical and cultural imprint on the land of Israel than Herod did. He had the worldview of the Roman Empire, whom he served as a puppet, client king. But he wielded ruthless autonomy in Israel and was determined to turn Israel into a modern Greco-Roman state. And in particular, he wanted Jerusalem to be seen as the Athens of the East. He embarked on massive building projects which demanded huge reserves of slave labor and massive amounts of revenue acquired through punitive taxation. Both of these strategies made him hugely unpopular. However, the results of his building projects, the modern Romanized port city of Caesarea Maritima, connected by a huge aqueduct, the many fortresses he built across the land of Israel, including the great forest of Masada down by the Dead Sea, modern Roman roads, his own glorious mausoleum at Herodium in the style of the Egyptian pharaohs, and of course his masterpiece, the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem and the construction of the Second Temple. All of these monumental achievements stand as testimony to his greatness right through to the present. Herod was undoubtedly a paranoid sociopathic ruler who killed many of his male relatives. Caesar Augustus once commented he would rather be Herod's pig than his son, and refused to choose an heir to succeed him for fear they might rise up and kill him, just as it was rumored he poisoned his own father. Antipater, in order to take power, or his own father Antipater, in order to take power. From what we know of Herod the Great through secular Jewish history, it seems quite consistent with his character that he would feel threatened by the birth of a would-be Messiah. So it helps you to understand the response when Herod finds out about the birth of Christ, to understand what kind of person he was. And he would seek to murder all the babies under age of 2 in order to make sure that that happened. The division of Herod's great kingdom. Following the death of Herod the Great in 4 BC, Israel was in a flux because the paranoid king had not trained any of his many sons to succeed him as king. Herod the Great himself may have poisoned or been implicated in the assassination of his own father, therefore he was reluctant to select any of his many sons to succeed him for fear what they might do to him. It was necessary for the Romans to intervene and divide up Herod's legacy. The disposition of Archelaus, about 6 AD. However, Archelaus proved an ineffective ruler, having not been trained in the statecraft by his father. He also inherited the most impacted area of Israel following the death of Herod the Great, due to the massive building projects and high taxation. A revolt broke out in his territory. The Romans then removed Archelaus from power and imposed direct military control on Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. In order to take charge of this directly controlled southern part of Israel, the Romans appointed a procurator or prefect or governor in the Roman military. The most famous of these, of course, is Pontius Pilate, who ruled from 26 to 36 AD. Pilate ruled Judea with an iron fist. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, how about if I read that all together? Pilate ruled Judea with an iron fist according to the Jewish historian Josephus. There, that makes more sense. And it's the closest marker we have for actually dating the time of Jesus' crucifixion, which took place under Pilate. It was essential for Rome to maintain peace and order in the empire. Wars against the enemies of Rome and internal rebellions were very expensive. Therefore, although it sounds idealistically romantic, the Pax Romana amounted to brutal repression of all populations under Roman control. There was Pax Romana because all potential and real opposition or rebellion was simply killed. From what we know of secular Jewish history, mostly through the writings of Josephus, it appears that Pilate was an extremely successful ruler. That is to say, he was an extremely brutal and savage Roman ruler. He was so brutal that Josephus reports he was removed from power by the Romans about 36 because of the savagery of his rule. It was such that his superiors in Rome feared that he might provoke a rebellion in Israel. History tells us that rebellion happened anyway a few years later, and we're going to get back into that a little further down the road. The other group that held supreme power and collaborated with the Romans in Judea were the priests and elders who ruled in the temple. The Romans chose who would be chief priest at this time. Caiaphas was chief priest throughout the rule of Pilate. Now think about that for the moment. The Romans would only choose a candidate that he knew would be flexible and willing to subjugate himself to the will of Rome. Imagine how that sat with the populace. Most Jews would have viewed him with a ferocious ambiguity. On the one hand, they were God's representatives on the earth, and on the other, they were the hand of the collaborators and the traitors. There was no separation of power. The Sanhedrin was responsible for executive, legislative, and judicial functions. Their central obligation to the Romans was the maintenance of law and order at the national and local level, and ensuring the steady flow of tax revenue. Picture Jesus throwing the tables in the temple. A little more of the background of what went on. The situation in Galilee, where Jesus spent virtually all his life, was rather different. Herod Antipas was the tetrarch in Galilee, and he ruled with a considerable degree of autonomy. It's unlikely that Jesus would have witnessed many Roman soldiers patrolling in Galilee. It's a small town, and they had a whole garrison within less than a day's march. So it wasn't necessary for the Romans to maintain two huge armies like this. Antipas kept the Romans happy, which is to say he ensured that there was peace and security in Galilee and made sure the tax revenue kept flowing. However, he was hated for the most part by his local population. No surprise. The only biographical sketch we have of Antipas in the gospel concerns a notorious birthday party. All right, which birthday party is being referred? John the Baptist. Now, when John the Baptist was ultimately beheaded, it was from Antipas. I thought we'd at least get through this. No. Herod Antipas became increasingly paranoid towards the end of his reign, and like his father, fearful of rebellion by his own people, he began to stockpile weapons at his many palaces. Needless to say, when the Romans found out about it, they weren't real thrilled with that. Of course, their paranoia would have immediately thought he's putting together an army to overtake Rome. So that was the end of Antipas. At the apex of the social structure, and you know what, I'm going to hold off on this. We're going to go through the social structure next. Any comments? Is everybody still awake? I understand some of you may not find this as fascinating as I did. But when you, from my side, when I start digging into this depth and I can begin to understand what is going on around, as Wade and I talked about last week, it doesn't change the message, but it turns pastel colors into fluorescent colors. Do you have a comment? Oh, okay. Are there any other comments? We are nowhere close to actually getting into chapter 1 of Revelation, just so you know. Yes, sir.
Do you think if Revelation would have been before Matthew, we would have had a better understanding?
If Revelation had been written before Matthew, would we have a better understanding?
Yeah, of our direction today as Christians.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Because it still would have contained the apocalyptic language, and Satan still would have deluded nations into thinking that there was going to be a second physical Jerusalem and all the rest of that comes out of premillennialism.
Because I ask that because I think this is the way it was perceived that because Revelation was used back in those times, back in the day, before Christianity, that Revelation was a tool that they used to suppress the people.
I did not uncover that. What Josh said was that Revelation was used as a tool to suppress the people. I did not uncover that in my study, but then I did not take my study very far into Roman Catholicism, the rise in the 2nd century, in that part of it. I tried to remain contextually true to the time frame that it was written. It is an interesting note that the 1st century church thoroughly rejected the concept of premillennialism. Yes, sir.
Apocalyptic literature was not unique to this as a very common use.
Not even close to unique, no, yeah. Daniel used it, Ezekiel used it.
Well, it's not just biblical. I mean,
No,
other
yeah,
sects and other people wrote it.
yeah. Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey uses a lot of apocalyptic type language. Yeah. Any other comments? James, would you be so kind as to close?